Warning: the following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers and/or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Southern Fried Paranormal with Len Dorman featuring Bones. Catch us on Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, Facebook, Stream, and everywhere else you catch your podcasts. And of course, WLFE-DB.com. Now, from the backwoods of southeast Arkansas, right beside the Bayou Bartholomew, the longest bayou on the planet, broadcasting from downtown.
Hello, everyone. Yes, this is a recorded show that I did at night because for some reason I'm not able to do a live show. It happens once in a while. So this is one show that I can put on. I'm going to do an hour show because that's all I can put on to record to show live. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, let me turn off this light here. There we go. Get off that blinding yellow light. We are going to talk about Bachelors Grove. Of course we are. Yeah, let me tell you something about my own private history in Bachelors Grove. Since I'm not interviewing anybody, and I'm going to be drinking a little bit of water because my throat dries out. Anyway, and yes, that's pure H2O. 2O. Anyway, when I first went to Bachelors Grove, it's been 5 years. It must be about 12 years now, 10, 12 years since I've started going to Bachelors Grove with a meetup group that became Midnight Paranormal Society. And we went there. Did very little equipment. In fact, the only equipment I had was a camera and some divining rods. And it turns out you don't need a whole lot of equipment in Bachelors Grove. A camera's a good thing to have. If you ever need to go, to be honest, I've only seen any kind. I don't care if it's the natural meters, mil meters. The only thing a millimeter gives you is you can record temperature changes. That's the only thing a millimeter can do for you. I've used a K2 there, but I've not used a normal K2. I've used one with a temperature sensor. And the temperature sensor is the only thing that I've ever seen work there with my own temperature sensor K2. I saw a millimeter beep once. You'd think, people say, well, that's those two cell phone towers. You have a cell phone tower and a microwave communications tower a quarter of a mile away. You'd think meters would be set off constantly. But it's in your meter dead zone there. The meters just do not work. In general case, I'd say 99 point some odd percent of the time, you're not going to get anything with the meter. So why try? Just if you got to take your mail and it's got one of the temperature gauges on there, that's a very good temperature gauge, and can check for hot spots or cold spots, temperature changes very rapidly for you. And that's about all the good you're going to get out of a millimeter there. K2s, leave them at home. Don't even bother. The natural other kind of meters to check any kind of electronic things, you're not going to get anything there. I've never seen one work at all. So just a little advice about going to Bachelors Grove. But we went, and I was just following the divining rods, and they tended to cross at gravestones. It crossed very shortly after arriving, walking in the gate, turn to your left. Oh, excuse me, the right, the other left. And it crossed there and turned to find out that's a child's grave and a couple of other half-marked graves, half-recorded graves. Then I kept marching forward, and at what would turn out to be where I did most of my investigating the entire time at Bachelors Grove was at the Patrick Stone. And it crossed there. And I moved on, and it crossed at a place where there was no grave. And I'm not going to say where that is, but it's at the very near the spot, if not the spot, where the old Undertaker was buried. I believe in 1989 he died. He was the last caretaker there, and he requested to be buried there, and he was. He was, excuse me, cremated, and they dug a 6-foot deep, as far as they could go, up to the hands, with a set of postal diggers, and put the ashes down at the bottom of the hole and covered it up unmarked. So nobody can, since it is an abandoned cemetery, that will keep anybody from digging up his ashes, because nobody knows well, very few people know the exact spot. I accidentally, without knowing, found the exact spot with divining rods. But anyway, I went over to the Fulton Stone, and it crossed there, and crossed in the Fulton plot. The cemetery, as I found out later, likes to take ownership of you. I think it's looking for an owner with all the desecration that's gone on there. I think it wants an owner or guardian. And I could feel that kind of pull there when they crossed. Didn't stay there too long, but at least I knew where it was. Could get there again. And it was familiar. We walked down to the creek, didn't walk across the creek, didn't really know about the houses, the foundations further on. Now, when I went there again, a little bit later, did go to the foundations. And we got one of the people there, I'm not going to name names, they came there, and half the team went to foundations, including this not to be named person. Not that I'm mad at him, I still like name names. And they came back, and the rest of us went. They were constantly calling out this one particular person who had been there before, his name. So yes, there are spirits there, and sometimes if you catch them there, you can catch them in a talkative mood. If they don't want to talk to you, forget about it, go home. Other times you can go there and they are talkative. I've been there on Saturday afternoon, I believe, or a weekday. I don't remember. But recorded about 2.5 hours of near nonstop talking from the spirits. And anybody, you could go there another time, probably later that afternoon, because they got really quiet. We tried to do another session after everything got quiet, and they just refused to say anything. And I've made this statement before, and I'll make it here. If I got results every time I opened up a recorder or turned on a camera or picked up divining rods or whatever I picked up, if I got some kind of results every place I've been and every time I pulled out a piece of paranormal equipment, I would wonder about my own findings and start wondering about my own results. I'd question myself, because that just doesn't happen. Any new people out there, you can investigate once a week. You could go a year without getting anything. You might get some your first time out. You're the lucky one. You might not get some to your 10th time out. You're fairly lucky. And your 8th, 9th, 20th time you go out, if you get a little bit of evidence, you're about average. Because it doesn't happen all that often. Sometimes I've gotten a little bit of evidence, a little bit of talking sounds that none of I can prove. This is not, people say, well, this is scientific. It's not scientific unless you can replicate it on demand. And spirits don't do that. This is more of a psychological enterprise rather than a scientific where if you mix chemical A and chemical B, you're going to end up with C every time. Apply the same amount of heat, the same amount of time, the same way, chemical A plus chemical B, and you end up with C. Either you end up with an explosion or a big black mess on the floor or whatever. It's going to happen virtually every time. Not so with spirits. You can go into almost one of the haunted places in the world, and you can try all day long and not get anything. You can walk in there, complete newcomer, never been there before, turn on your first device, and boom, something happens. It's luck. It's keeping your mind open, questioning everything, try to debunk everything. I've heard footsteps in buildings before and immediately went screaming for the human who had invaded my zone where I thought I was by myself. Now, sometimes I found somebody else there. Another investigator stomping kind of hard for some reason and threw that evidence out. Somebody had walked in and I did not know they were coming, not saying they weren't supposed to be there, but I did not know they were there. I thought I had evidence, but I did not. Other times I went looking for a human making footsteps or rattling other noises and realized that I am very much indeed alone as far as humans go in the building. And same way Bachelors Grove. On some days you go out, especially on the weekends during the summer, you used to, because I've been living out of Chicago now 6 years. 6 years, just a couple weeks ago. And you just go there on the weekends and it's constant flow. You could go there on a busy weekend and there's 20, 25 people walking one way or the other on the path. It's only a quarter of a mile long, but you can see there's people in front of you, there's people behind you, there's people walking towards you. You weren't able to park that close to the highway in the parking lot across the street because there were so many other cars there. I like to go during the week and get in there by myself or for very few other people. But if you go in there, expect somebody to walk in on you. You can hear them coming down the path. You may have kids. I've seen some local kids come in there, and they hated the fact that I was there because they were there to prove their manhood in their mind. So basically what they were going to do is desecrate the cemetery if they didn't want to do it in front of somebody else. They were still, even in front of me, were cursing some of the members in there. And at night, I've heard stories of the Forest Preserve, because it is in the Forest Preserve. Even though the cemetery is not part of the Forest Preserve, it's in the Forest Preserve. Going in there and finding people back in the cemetery and around the cemetery with machetes. There have been a couple of people back there with guns. So you just don't know what you're going to get into when you go in there. And most of the trouble comes from people, idiots. I mean, what's a machete if you're afraid of ghosts and something jumping out at you? One, why are you there? Two, what's a machete or a gun going to do to a ghost? A car appears in front of you, a spirit appears in front of you, the disappearing house appears in front of you. What are you going to do with a machete? Then you're not going to do anything. All the machete does is protect you against other people. And are you willing to go in there and actually try to commit murder because maybe somebody gave you a start? Or maybe like you, somebody else is back there when and where they shouldn't be. Anyway, let's get back to the houses back across the creek. They're in the spring and the fall, you can find the path when the vegetation dies down. If you want to have an event there, like I have a couple of times, you've almost got to go in there. You're not supposed to go back there with a machete, but you need to go back there and break off a few branches to kind of clear the path and mark it, because it's very hard to send somebody down they're going through the woods. They're off your path. The path, if you go straight, and if you take a hard left there by the creek, just after you cross the creek, that's the other end of this circle. And there's also a way to go all the way around it into by the near the other end of the road, which used to be the Midlothian Highway, which is what you have to cross to get to the cemetery from the parking area. The old road runs right by the cemetery. But it used to be a bridge there where you cross the creek. You can see the very little of what remains of a bridge that was once there. What you're on when you go straight is what's left of a little bit of broken asphalt and gravel from the old highway. It used to go right through there. But you follow the old path back, and next thing you know, there's a big hole in the ground, and don't fall in it. That's a well. Let's not try to dive in there accidentally. And right beside it, of course, is the old foundation. Now, in the past, that's where we got the people asking again for the person who was there before we were. But that's the only time I've gotten a result like that. You can go back there and not get anything, or occasionally you can get a few voices. And that was a very unusual time when I got the voices asking for the other person. And there was giving a name is kind of intelligent, but they weren't that talkative other than asking, where is he? And all he got when we talked to him was a kind of a hello, or, and that's just basic communication like that. Nothing real exciting, nothing scary at all, which is the thing about Bachelor's Grove. Once you start looking at it, a lot of the communication you get is not scary. People go by there, try to test their manhood and desecrate the place and curse to the people there, like the ghosts come out and try to fight them in a fist fight. I'm not sure the mentality of that kind of thing, but it's there, it happens, and you have to deal with it when you find out. There's also other people who have gone in Bachelor's Grove too much. They have a lot of information, a lot of background, a lot of history, but they are affected by the place, and they want to own the place. We have one guy that doesn't anywhere near live the cemetery anymore, but he will go in there and climb a tree and then say, that camera doesn't work in here, or that meter doesn't work in here. That's not really an infrared camera. And just anything to slam you. And sometimes we'll call people names that are in there trying to do something. Because he'll sometimes tell people to get out of his cemetery. The man has no ownership at all. He's just an idiot. And I think he's kind of stopped going in there. He used to have a YouTube page, all kinds of videos, raising saying about this or this person or that person in the cemetery. And I think that's all kind of gone downhill. He's definitely got a mental problem. But he wants to own the cemetery. He wants to run it. Have another person that goes down there, can't drive. Before I left Chicago, he wrecked 3 vehicles, and they said you can't have a driver's license anymore. Finally, he was having some bad reactions with medication, and they finally just pulled his license. They said, you cannot drive anymore. Here's an ID. Have a good day. So he rides a bike down there, but he is still drawn to the cemetery. He just stands there and walks around. He sometimes takes trash out, checks the 2 garbage cans that are there, and takes them out. But he's not an authorized caretaker, but he feels obligated to do that. And we'll tell you stories about, although he doesn't believe in the paranormal, he can tell you a couple of interesting stories about people who've come there. And he will tell you real quick stories about winning the lottery, which is his dream, of course, and buying the cemetery from the county and buying the surrounding land from the forest preserve, even if he had to spend $100 million for land that has no electricity to it. And they're right up against the side of the road in the middle of a forest preserve. So he could build a house over there on the side of a hill and overlook the cemetery, an abandoned cemetery, from the front porch of his house, and just sit there all day. This is he's had a couple car wrecks, even several car wrecks, and he was beaten almost to death a couple of decades ago. And he has obviously not a few mental issues. And the cemetery just about completely taking him over as far as wanting to be an owner. If you the more you hang out of there, the more you have these tendencies to own the place. Now back to the foundations. You go past that foundation and you just keep on walking the path. You'll pass where the location of an old Indian village. And occasionally, there's not many members of the tribe left. You will catch some of them go back there. They want to commune, spend the night in the forest preserve illegally, and commune with their ancestors because they know their ancestors lived there. Kind of past that flat spot, close to where the creek likes to flood. And there's another foundation. This is where the path can get you lost because it angles real sharply. Plus, you've got to jump over a couple of logs. It's a real tough go once you pass where the Indian village used to be. It takes kind of a left-hand turn. But you go back there. There's a little bit more of the foundation than the other place. You can find the well easily. There's more of that left. And there's a foundation of an old silo. That is the biggest and the most obvious house foundation in the area. And there I've tried to get something. And the biggest thing I got, and I'll try to quote it here, was the Echobox that I was using. I heard a weird noise. It's supposed to be, my wife's supposed to be asleep. Anyway, I hadn't done it. I've been listening for 2 hours with Echobox and just about run the batteries down. Hadn't got anything, so I'm about to write it off. I was by there with 2 other people. And all of a sudden it has this loud, it sounded like a big computer clearing its throat. It was obviously a mechanical sound, not human, not spiritual, but it sounded like a computer clearing its throat. And came a male voice. It said, "She's wearing a blonde hat." And a female voice comes and says, "She's what?" He says, "She's wearing a blonde hat, look." And then there was laughter. Then I heard the computerized throat clearing again, and that was it. Well, the woman that was with us back there, she had her hair really cut short and wears a wig. And it turns out that way back when that place had a few people living around and it was farmland there, they called a wig a hat. And what they were making fun of was the young woman wearing a wig. I can't explain that. I can't debunk that. And it's the only exciting 30 seconds of my about 4 or 5 hour stay in the area that day. That's all I got. But that was rather exciting. I couldn't quite understand what they were because it shocked me that all of a sudden I got a voice. I had actually 2 voices. But I heard it later and I was quite surprised at what they said. And I told the other people I was with it. They said, "What?" I told the young lady I hesitated for a while, and I finally told her, And she just looked at me and she said, they were making fun of my wig. I said, apparently. I thought about not telling you, but, I decided you should know. Okay, thanks. And she walked away. But that's the only thing I got at the back. We call it the back because as far back as the path goes, because the path continues away at a different angle and takes you back to the creek, back where the path started, and then leads back to the very path, like I said, where it forked to the left immediately. Upon crossing the creek, it leads you right back. There's the creek to your right, and there you are across the creek back, and you're at the cemetery. There's another foundation kind of across the cemetery, a little bit closer to the road, but you can't get there. Even during the wintertime when the greenery dies back, it is in a thorn patch. And where if you even try, wear awful thick pants, awful thick shirts. Because if you, even with thick shirts and pants, it's probably going to scratch you because you're talking about 1/2 inch long thorns and talking about a whole bunch of them on a branch and get hit with a whole bunch of branches almost every step. So my advice is don't bother. It's not worth it. Now there is one close to the road, and you when you first go down the path towards the cemetery, you'll see a path to your left, and that's the big circle path that goes all the way around. It goes back to the path to the creek. There's a fork there at the foundation, and you can continue walking past that foundation and go all the way around up very close to the road instead of taking the shortcut and taking you back in the small circle back to the creek. And of course, you have to cross the creek about twice to go on that path. So have you some galoshes or overshoes, or do it during on a warm spring day, because you do it during a summer day after the growth has come up. It's a hard go. It's not the best walking trail in the world. During the winter you can, but that's all cold water in the wintertime. Sometimes it's frozen over. Anyway, it's not much of a foundation. There's no silo there. There's no well. But you can see the bricks are of a small home foundation. It was actually one of the last homes occupied in the area before they forced everybody to move because they didn't have addresses for that area. Because like I said, it's old Midlothian Highway, and you're on the Midlothian Highway getting to the cemetery. So, they forced everybody out, and it was one of the last houses that were occupied. There's not much of a foundation left. It's you got a high growth of trees there. There's water. There's one not quite to the cemetery between the old highway and the new highway, and it's what they call the old caretaker house. Don't know whether it was a caretaker house. I don't know. Maybe this where he kind of hung his hat while he was working in the cemetery. But there's nothing there. Now, sometimes you'll see a shadow figure over in that area, which is the old caretaker watching you. There's been a lot of desecration of the cemetery, and he was a tall man, and you will see a tall shadow figure sometimes over there watching you. If you're not doing anything wrong, he'll fade away. If the people down there want to prove their own manhood, look over there back to kind of toward the Midlothian Highway, back down the path that you just came down Bachelors Grove. And if you're there to do no good, you're liable to see that shadow figure watching you. And you may pay for it. Because there's a story of a guy going in there and stealing a headstone. Took it home, put it by his work shed in his backyard. And about 2 to 3 weeks after he did that, he died in a car wreck. They later found the headstone because his father sold that house to somebody, and they were clearing off the backyard. Of course, like everybody does when you buy a house, and found that headstone. He contacted the man who sold it to him and said that it must have been something his son brought home. And they put an ad on public media about what cemeteries just belonged to, and they found the people who, with the one I was talking about, saw it and went and got it, put it approximately back where it's supposed to have been in the cemetery, which is still a grave. All right, we're halfway home in this 1 hour recorded show, and I am going to show our little commercials that are normal halfway. All right, here we go.
Warning, the following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers and or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Rochester Winter Parafest is back, March 25th, 26th, and 27th of 2022. Come say hi to Naked and Afraid celebrities Melanie Elizabeth and Trent Nielsen, Haunted Case Files Jack Kenna, Monster Quest Steve Coles, and more. This event has it all: paranormal investigators, UFO researchers, Bigfoot researchers, and even photo opportunities for the kids with Buddy the Bigfoot. Oh, okay, adults too. Come on down and get a tattoo from Ink Master Tony DeVille. There are psychic gallery and individual readings, as well as radio personalities, authors, jewelry, makeup artists, and so much more. It's only $15 per person, and children under 10 are free. March 25th, 26th, and 27th of 2022. For more information, go to WLFE-DB.com. Yes, Winter Parafest is back. Valley Oak Event Center, Geneseo, New York, next to Denny's.
We are back. Sorry about that little glitch. Got a little bit hyperactive with the finger. Anyway, back to Bachelor's Grove. Now, more recent things have come up. There's a video posted on YouTube, actually. It shows my first interaction. I was practically asleep in a chair, and all of a sudden the alarm on my temperature sensor on my K2 started going off. Not lights. The lights never flashed. I talked to the person who built that, and they said there's just no way that should go off that loudly without a horrible change of temperatures. And I have set it in a freezer for a little bit, pulled it out into an 85 degree room, and the temperature changed slowly, and it got a very almost inaudible tone, showing that there was a temperature change. As loud as this thing went off, there's just no way to make that kind of temperature change. The only way I could imitate it on the K2 was to actually place my fingers on it. It's the only way I could do it, to change temperatures, up or down. And of course, I started looking at it without touching it and realized there was something about a 3 foot tall, 2.5, 3 foot tall figure there standing in front of me. And so I looked at it. The camera wasn't picking up anything because the full spectrum camera cannot pick up a temperature change like your naked eye can, because it was a heat signature apparition. The temperature was different than the surrounding air. And I did this a couple of times, and finally traced it down, asked them, where maybe their grave was. And I traced it down and to the Patrick's Town. Okay, that didn't make any sense to me until later. I started hanging out a little bit. They have open tours of the Humphrey House in Ordon Park, used to. I'm thinking they do the same thing now. One Sunday a month. I think it's a third Sunday. If I'm not mistaken. Need to check their website and see when their house is open only one day a month. Started going out there and realizing that Humphreys had a very interesting story, and he played around. John Humphrey became the most powerful man in Cook County outside of Chicago because he was a state senator from the area, and in fact tried to stop the 1892-93 World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, because to get big enough to host the World's Fair, Chicago talked several of their suburbs into joining Chicago and becoming just the named neighborhood of Chicago. In fact, if you look on the western boundary of Chicago, the neighborhoods are all named. The reason they're kind of named that way is because they used to be suburbs of Chicago with their own independent government, mayors, city councils, whatever. But anyway, out of the John Humphrey house, I was trying to get in contact with John Humphrey, of course. And one night did, and he got a little angry with me, mainly because I was, as a trigger object, I was wearing his beaver skin hat, the original beaver skin hat. I'm one of just a handful of people who's ever investigated the place at night. I think Dale Kazmarik's been in there one night. David Olson was in there with me, and I finally got John to actually act, and we caught him moving and standing there in his bedroom. Well, when I went to Bachelors Grove the next week, apparently his first wife found that amusing and contacted me there. And this is how I discovered who the White Lady of Bachelors Grove is, that old ghost picture that Dale Kazmarik's group got so many years ago in the early 90s, was indeed the first wife of John Humphrey, Amelia Patrick Humphrey. And I say her maiden name as her middle name, because that's usually how people do it. Because a few minutes ago you heard me mention the Patrick Stone. Well, why does Amelia Patrick Humphrey go to Bachelors Grove? They got married in 1863. She got pregnant. And 11 months and 4 days after having the baby being born, it died, crib death. Now, in Orland Park, they had a prepaid plot to the big cemetery in Orland Park. But, and so I emphasize that word, but, they did not allow burials until 1869. The child died in 1865 and could not be buried in Orland Park Cemetery yet. So, they buried her in her mother's family plot in Bachelors Grove Cemetery. Now, in the 80s, Bachelors Grove Cemetery, they announced they were closing and would soon be abandoned. And no more active burials would be there. And for anybody who wanted their family members to move to another plot, to please come get their loved ones. And that's why there's not too many headstones in there. Because a lot of people, of course, when they dug the body up, they took the headstone with them. There's other headstones. Some of them have been thrown in the pond. Others have been just willy-nilly around the cemetery because they no longer had a place to be, because of the remains were gone. They were exhumed and moved to a family plot in another active cemetery. Well, the Humphrey family and the Patrick family had either all moved away or died off. So in the Patrick plot, which is the second largest, I believe, plot in Bachelors Grove, none of those members were exempt. There was nobody to claim them, nobody to pay for the removal, And so they were left there. The big stone was left there. And Livia Mae Humphrey was left there. And this is why Amelia came to Bachelor's Grove almost every day at dusk to visit her firstborn child, who at the time could not move. She was stuck in that cemetery. She kind of broke away a little bit and was contacting me, and I contacted her mother and went back and forth. And one day, I wanted to try an experiment. Well, one day she followed me home. So she discovered she could move. And she actually moved a bowl out of the dish. I was talking to my wife, and we heard dishes rattling around where she just washed the dishes. And there was a bowl removed out of the drain and put where we found later, 6 to 8 months later, found where it was hidden in the bottom of the cabinet, way in the back, a place where we never would have set a bowl. There's no reason to set a bowl back there. But the bowl, my wife looked for 6 to 8 months, there it was. In a place we had to get down on our hands and knees to find. In fact, did not find it until we were looking for something else and getting ready for a move down here to Arkansas. And she went back too. And I said, okay, go back to the cemetery. Go back for your mother. Your mother's probably looking for you. And she left. She followed me home a couple of times after that. But I decided I'd have a little fun one Sunday, the Sunday that the Humphrey house was open. I went in there with an assistant, and I said, do you want to go to the house? We are going to go to the house. Do you want to go with us? And the sound was going off with the K2, and then suddenly stopped. And the person I was with and I had a huge, heavy feeling. And what we had was an attachment. Not just Libby Mae, 3 of her siblings also died early. 2 of them used to come to the Bachelor's Grove and play with her. And we had 3 kids with us, between 2 of us. So we got in the car, went up to the Humphrey house, where a psychic said, you have an attachment. Yeah, no. We got inside the Humphrey house, and I said, okay, off. Gone, you're home. And we felt the relief, and I had the K2 in my hand, and it went off because she was holding my hand a few minutes later. And it went off for about 30, 40 seconds and stopped its alarm going off. And I have never, outside of putting my fingers on the temperature sensor, have never gotten it to go off like that again. Ever. Any place. Anywhere. Anyhow. I've got to physically put my fingers on it to make it do that. And there was another guy, again, I'm not going to say the names, having an event out there. And I said, you've got some guests here. He got a little bit upset, but he did ask for the names. And he did admit to me later on that he confirmed they were there. The psychic saw me a little bit later, said, your attachment's gone. What did you do? I explained the story to her, and she laughed for quite a while, which was a strange thing on a ghost tour of a house. Because she just thought it was highly amusing that I would bring ghosts to a ghost tour. And they were running around the house, enjoying the car ride there. And I imagine that evening, Amelia did not show up to Bachelor's Grove because her daughter was not there. They were all at the Humphrey house. So I'm thinking The Humphrey house is quite a bit haunted. It has several child spirits in there, along with Amelia, also the second wife of John Humphrey. Uh, the Amelia died, I believe, in 1881. Soon after John was elected state senator, he had to get a secretary there, and not at the Humphrey house because it was not built until Amelia was dead, almost was dying. But he was having an affair with the secretary for years and years. It was an arranged marriage. It was two families who had money, had property in the area. It was just a marriage of convenience, good sized dowry. Anyway, Amelia died, and 6 months after she died, his first wife, he married the secretary for his second wife and had her children there in the house that technically was built for Amelia. So, and they are buried today in Orland Park Cemetery, John in the center. His first wife on one side, his second wife on the other, and their individual kids that were buried in Orland Park beside their mother. So this cannot be all happiness over on the other side. So this is why you had one of the homies of Bachelors Grove, and it's also why I was not able to tell the story on certain TV shows, because it was not demonic. In fact, it's not even scary. All it is a man playing around on his wife, and the love of a woman for her firstborn child. So it's kind of sad, kind of funny. And so, yes, I have played a practical joke on a human with a ghost. The corporation of the ghost. It's not like I used the ghost. I said, you want to go? And they wanted to go. And there we went. And there you are. After that, there wasn't a whole lot going on in Bachelors Grove, shockingly. I did, one of the last times I was there, just a little bit of standard conversation going on, and not a whole lot. And all of a sudden, heard a lot less traffic, but hadn't really picked up on it. It was unusual, but here we are. And I saw a big, over 6 foot, heat signature apparition. I said, is there a spirit in Bachelors Grove right now that doesn't belong here? And had several voices say yes. I said, I can see you over there, right? And remained silent, didn't say anything, and finally kind of faded away. I said my goodbyes and left the cemetery, wondering why there was no traffic. That's one reason I was leaving. There's something weird, because usually every few seconds you hear a car go by on the Thelodian Highway, and I couldn't figure out why there was no traffic. So I got creeped out because of the lack of traffic, and I got in the car, realized that I didn't have to even look both ways. There was no traffic at all. Crossed the road, pulled out, and went down back towards Chicago, and realized what happened at the first road where they could, throughway. There was a cop sitting there directing everybody to take the turn and blocking the Thelodian Highway. What had happened if you went the other way, the first true road has a traffic light, and a biker had come through and was driving a green light. It was just driving down the road, and somebody, just as he was crossing the middle of the intersection, came flying through the intersection at 60 miles an hour at least or above, and hit the bike. And you know what happens when a biker gets hit that hard from the side? He's just gone. It's almost instantaneous. And I was the first person that he saw. He followed me home. We lived in a haunted house. There was a guy there. He'd done some artwork from the original owners. My wife was the second owner of the house. And then, he came, he was raised there and moved with his parents when they sold the house and died. So he hung around where he was a child. And he didn't show himself for about 3 or 4 years. First 3 or 4 years I lived there, and then did. And he wanted me to go down to the basement, and I started digging through some areas like I was kind of being asked to. Found an old painting that he did, and so I displayed it in the house. Anyway, the wife caught him looking into the bedroom. Heard some footsteps and saw a dark figure different than the one that lived there. And they heard the normal figure woke up, and the two of them walked down the hall together, and we never heard from them since. We're assuming they crossed over to the other side. They just needed a little help, a little more motivation. They found a friend, somebody else who was kind of lost. Had followed me from Bachelors Grove to the house and just thoroughly lost, didn't know how to move around by himself. And they figured it out together and never heard from him again. So that's some of my stories from Bachelors Grove. Now, I'm going to try to cut this video short because I want it less than an hour, because I can only, this is a recorded one, and it's got to be a little bit under an hour for me to broadcast it at a later date. All right. We shall see you another time with another story. Hopefully, most of my shows will be live, and I won't have to go off on just a story about myself. My show is going to be mostly interviews, and that's what I want to do. If there's anybody out there who wants to be on the show and talk about what they're doing, what their group's doing, some haunts they have, a Paracon they're going to be at, or if they're throwing, contact me at CEARKPS, SEARKPS, at gmail.com. It's SEARK, CEARK. Stands for Southeast Arkansas Paranormal Society. CEARKPS at gmail.com. And I'll be more than glad to either host you on the show, contact me at Lynn Dorman on Facebook, or CEARK or Lynn Dorman at YouTube, and say, I love being on the show. I've got something to advertise here. I'm going to be doing something, be going somewhere. There is a Paracon here or there. Be glad to help you out and interview you. And hey, we can have fun for a couple hours talking about whatever we're doing. All right. Have a good time. I'm not going to say have a good night, because I don't know what time of day you're watching this. I'm not even knowing what time of day I'm broadcasting or when I'm going to broadcast it. But at least I've got it recorded so I can. So have a good life. Peace. And be respectful to the ghost.
Thanks for watching our show. Be sure to tune in to next week, as once again we journey way down south into Bayou Country for another heaping portion of Southern Fried Paranormal with Lynn Dorman and Bones. Make sure to like, share, and follow. Y'all come back now. You hear?